Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Business, a Practical Pet Chat podcast. You know what? We're doing so many different things, everybody. Sometimes even I have to take a look. But I'll tell you what, you can find us on so many different channels, and kudos to all of you because you are. So, whether it's your favorite YouTube video channel or it's one of your podcast streaming services, definitely check this out. We're focusing in on the businesses in these episodes because, again, Lorin and I, we get a lot of requests. And Lorin, first off, it's good to see you.
Same here. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah. Secondly, I was going through and I had several folks, and really thank you all. You have been really good, especially with this show, of reaching out to us with feedback, with questions, things you want us to see. So make sure you continue doing that for both our pet business podcast as well as our pet parent podcast. You can do that at practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Hit us up for either one of those. But Lorin, I had a really good interaction with a couple of folks this week. And I know you have this as well because we both get these calls, oh, hey, can I get some advice from you? Can you consult? Can you this? Can you that? I want to get into the pet business, or I'm in the pet business, but I think I'm at a transitional phase where I've got to elevate and this and that. And I'm going to throw it to you first because I've got a couple of points that I hit on the minute they tell me that. But when someone comes to you and says, hey, Lorin, I want to get into the pet business, or hey, Lorin, I've been doing things and I think I need to pivot. How do you approach that? And it's probably two different ways.
Yeah, it depends on how they say it. It depends on the individual. If there's any like, I'm sort of thinking about it, or this is what I really want to do type of emphasis. But the first question is always why. And people are taken aback by that sometimes because it's like, what do you mean why? Why do you want to get into any business? In any particular business, why do you want to get into this business? And typically the almost 100% of the time the response is, well, I love animals. It's like, get that completely. Yeah. But you can
You
love them
better.
and have them in their in your home and not get into the business. Why do you want to get into this as a business? What are you looking at? Do you know somebody who's got one? Do you just go into a store and you love the way it's run and they make you feel good? What in particular? It's really interesting to have those conversations and see where people are at and how much homework they've done on it, how much understanding they have of not just the industry and pets, but in businesses and what it takes to run a business. Before I had my store, I've had four or five other of my own businesses. And so I knew getting into it what I was in for, but I'll never forget we were about a year and a half into it. And my husband and I were having a discussion. He was at his work. I'm at the store and we're on the phone and we were talking about how much needed to be done for where we were at that particular time because we were still fairly new. And I said, this doesn't happen overnight. Everything, this takes time and a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of hours. We're not close yet. And there's sort of silence on the phone. And I said, if you don't want to do this, we should get out now. And he said, I don't not want to do it. I just didn't know it was going to take so much time and energy. Because we were working it all the time. I mean, he'd leave his job and he'd come straight to the store and, he'd be in a shirt and tie and he'd be mopping the floor. So I mean it just there's a lot more than I think people realize, and I know a lot of people that continue to work their what I call their real job while they're trying to get this off the ground, or other people who just go all in. And there's so much to know, there's so much homework, there's so much um due diligence, for lack of a better phrase, that you have to do in your area, in your location, in your demographics, what you're going for, what your plan is going to be, what your philosophy is, what's going to set you apart, how are you going to lay it out, where are you going to put it, what's the traffic like, does the city have space for it, how many stores are around you that do what you do, and that's only retailers. If you want to do a product, because I know at one time I was actually going to make a pet food, it's no different. You still have all that to do, but you also have so many compliances and things that you have to meet that you have to, pet foods require formulators and, federal oversight and local ag oversight. And there's just so much to it. And then there's other products. What about that? And a lot of people don't even know. And I'm just hitting points
Right.
here because it's like it's literally drinking out of a fire hose once you are in it. And the reason I say that is because it's all money and it's all time and energy. So you need to be fully aware before you get into it that it's not just going to work and playing with pets all day, if only. And the money comes rolling in. It's the perfect job. You play with animals all day and money just comes pouring into your account. I wish, it's just so much more. So I think that a lot of people, yes, it's a great job. It's a fun job if you're impassioned about it, but it's seriously it's underestimated.
Right. And it's still a job. At the end of the
Yes.
day, it doesn't matter what you're doing, the minute it crosses that threshold, in most instances, it's a job. You get paid, which means it elevates the expectations across the board.
Hmm.
And I love that you said too that y the things you're pointing out are just even the top level. And I know we'll do, more discussions about those types of things. I love your question is one that I ask, but I already know because I love pets. But I'll say, why do you want to get into it? And what's interesting is the folks that really catch my attention, who I'll consider going deeper with, are the ones that don't give me that answer. Now I know everybody will change their answer to me, but because it's almost like, well, of course, why would you get into something if you didn't have a strong affinity for it? Because one of the things for me, I often say is the most surprising element of the pet business side of things is how many people prioritize passion over the business side of things.
Right.
And I call it, passion over profit syndrome, because there's so many people who are so proud of, well, I haven't made anything, but I am so passionate and I'm being felt. That's awesome. But that's also going to put some additional strains. And more often than not, what I have seen is that unfortunately, your passion will fade because of the pressures of life.
Hmm.
And that breaks my heart. It's how I even got into doing so many different things in the pet world. I would go out well before the days of the internet and all the rest of this and be at these different trade shows for pet parents. Remember that? And we'd get at this local thing, and I'd come back and I'd want to share with my newsletter list. Here's some cool products that I found out about and this and that. And I'd call them and they'd be like, oh yeah, Rob, we're shutting down. So if you want to, let people know, we'll give them 50%. I'm like, you're shutting down. Why? Passion over running it like a business. The pressures of a business are real. And so great, because the passion will sustain you when the pressures could otherwise break you. So I love that you have the passion. But now, and you hit on this, what have you really done to figure out? Because the one that also kills me is there's nothing else like it in the market, and that's why I want to do it. I can't find anything that meets my standards in the market, and that's why I need to do it. I'm the only
And
one that
while someone's saying that, I'm looking up in their area and I said, well, I've got six right now just pulled up on my computer. And they're like,
right. Well,
oh, well, that one's not the same. And that and it's like, oh my gosh.
and over the years, I'm sure you've had it too. where you know what they're saying is wrong. And so you're like, I don't want to crush your spirit. Let me help redirect you a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and I've made this statement a number of times, and this applies whether you're a pet parent or a pet business. I don't see people getting into this industry to not do better, to not do great things, to not meet higher expectations that they have that don't seem to be met by the market. And so one of the pivots I'll ask them is, do you know if what you are telling me you want to bring to the market, can somebody achieve that alongside you? Is it a co-packer? If it's a store that you want to set up, what are the limitations that are keeping other folks from doing that? Because it's hard for me to believe that there's no other pet parent who wouldn't see that opportunity. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't aim to that level. But I had someone recently come to me and say, I want to do this because no one else is doing this, and I'm going to this and that. And I was like, okay, how are you going to achieve that? And they're like, I'm going to have the best, the best, the best. I was like, okay, are you manufacturing that yourself? No, but I know that there's companies out there can do it. And I was thinking in my head, yeah, I know there are companies out there that can do that too. And unfortunately,
They're
you're not,
maxed.
yeah, you're not going to be able to get on their production schedule. And oh, by the way, some of the ingredients that you're telling me you want, what do you think you're charging for that? You
Right.
know, so it is a business at the end. And it's, I'm encouraged. And at the same time, I don't want to discourage anybody, but you're turning and asking those questions because, hey, you've probably seen some things I haven't, Rob, Lorin. Give me your feedback, you
Well,
know.
the entrepreneurial spirit is part of what makes America great,
Yeah.
and everybody has heard the adage, do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life kind of thing. And I will tell you, I loved my store so much that whatever little bit of off time I had, I went to other stores in other areas just because I loved to be around the dynamic and feel that energy and that kind of thing. I mean, I'm truly obsessed with the industry and pets in general. But the fact of the matter is, you do work. I don't care how much you love it.
Yeah.
The more you love it, the harder you're going to work, because you want to attain that level that is just higher than what you see other people do or what your interpretation of it is or what your philosophy is. And it's interesting. It was really telling during 2020, um, with what was going on in the world, that how many stores were barely surviving that because they didn't have enough stores that had been around 10, 15 years that didn't have enough to to sustain them to get through the worldwide hiccup that was going on for businesses everywhere. And we're still feeling the effects of that. We're still seeing the effects of that in costs and in transportation and in consolidation. M&As, are happening still, to a ever increasing amount. Big chains are closing down. That's a very long lasting effect because it wasn't anything any of us foresaw. It
Right.
wasn't something any of us could imagine. And to be able to continue to carry on through that, now that we've all lived it, I think it's a factor people have to consider. You have to consider the what ifs. You have to consider, if I think I've made it in my first, do you remember 5-year plans? Oh my gosh. Do you remember that? I mean, you didn't even get out of college without, some guidance counselor saying, "Do you have a 5-year plan? Do you know what it is?" Um, there's nothing of that now. But when you own the business, you need a 5-year, 10-year. You need a 2-year, 5-year, 8-year, 10-year. You've got to figure this out. and all the potential what ifs, because where you think you've got it made at maybe your 3 or 5 year mark in the past, it's so volatile and so competitive out there now that that doesn't exist anymore. Now it's a you might break even where you hope to break even at 3 or 5 years. Now you hope to break even at 8 or 10, depending on what it is you do and how well you do it and how much you have of time and energy and money to invest into it. So there's a lot of factors. And you say that there aren't people who get into it for profit first. I wish that were the case. I unfortunately see people who it's equal and they think that, yeah, I love this and that's great, but I'm investing in this because I'm really hoping that this is going to be an answer for, my spouse not to work anymore or for us to get more free time, more vacation. I don't have to work as hard at my job. Maybe I could cut back, those kinds of things because they're thinking about the profit. And I'm like, oh my, well, let's take a look at that. You got to start with your lease and you got to start with the costs and you've got to start with your overhead and your employee costs. And it's harder than ever to find employees that, you know, um, you can afford who have the work ethic.
Right.
And so on and so on and so on. Things that we casually knew were a line item now have changed from a line item here to a line item here because they're hypercritical and not replaceable and not easily attainable. And the cost has gone from here to here, for not even the employee that you would normally be going after here. So
I
it's all kinds of factors have completely shifted. The whole world has shifted. And you really have to think about those things because it's not whatever you think it is, believe me, it's 10 times beyond that.
Right. Well, you said a couple things here, and so I made a couple notes here. I love the notion of you know the the more you love it, it's not work, it's this, it's that. But when you said the harder you work at it, I made a note here of not only the harder you work at it, but to your point, it is a part of everything you're doing. And you're tying back everything you experience, even outside of the pet business, into, oh, I wonder how that could apply. Or, hey, is this, something I should be thinking about? We're a little different, but, and I hear that from a lot of the successful folks, is that they did not realize how
Right,
all consuming it does become, not because that was their personality, that's just the way it was.
right.
And you learn in additional ways, but it's just you're never able to turn it off. And so as you were describing that just really pinged with me of like,
Well, that's the thing about being an owner, right? It's not
right,
like when you're the employee, and not every job, of course, falls into this category, but when you're the employee, you get it from your desk and you go home and maybe you have some work that you take home, maybe you don't. I know you do. So it just sort of depends on your individual job. But when you're an owner, you are never off, like
right,
never off. You're
right,
constantly thinking about it. You're constantly, even in your off time, you're looking at how things are run. I still do it. I go to a restaurant and I look at how how everything is flowing, how management's handling things, whether or not things are being passed on appropriately, whether or not attention is being paid, to all the tables. And with any business, you walk into any business when you've done merchandising for 30 years or whatever, there's no way you could go into any business. I used to stand at the coffee shop in line and you work your way up the line and you know how there's the cooler right there?
yep,
So you standing there and you're waiting for time, and I'm standing there looking at the cooler, and I'm facing product and pulling it forward, and organizing it because it's just you don't even think about it. You see that it hasn't been addressed, and you do it because it's just second nature to you. And then you're like, what the hell? I mean,
yeah,
it's just you can't help but do it. You just want to line everything up. And it, 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 I didn't mind it, but I will tell you, in the 20 years I had my store, never took a vacation,
Mm,
never took a vacation. And when I say time off, it was really limited. I was planning promos on holidays, because it meant that the store was closed. And so my phone wasn't going to be ringing from somebody at the store. So I actually had a minute of peace and quiet that I could sit and figure out promos or sales or some sort of a plan or my future orders or whatever trade show I was going to, all that kind of stuff. It's not time off.
right.
And I've recently consulted with people where employees fell through. And so the spouse is stepping up. And the spouse is normally taking kids to soccer and, doing these other things. And they're having to take time away from that and get other moms or dads or, neighbors or family members to fill in for them. And they don't want to do that long term. And so I've consulted with them and I'm like, so what's your plan? Well,
Right.
I don't know. I'm looking for help on that. Like, oh my, okay. So, and then you start backtracking of how'd you get into this situation where that wasn't a consideration to what your plan B was going to be. And so, it's just that people I don't think really realize the difference of being an owner and what all that entails. And it's tough. When you've been an owner, it's tough to be an employee after that, um, because there are elements to it that are fantastic when you're the owner. But it's a serious mistake to underestimate the cost that isn't necessarily financial that goes into owning your business, retail
Yeah.
or otherwise.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure we're not discouraging everybody out there.
And no, and I'm not trying to.
It's
I'm
the
just
first
saying
time
that
you,
you need to
yeah,
realize it.
yeah, you've eyes wide open and with a real understanding. We want you to be successful. When folks call us, it's not that, you know, I'm sitting there going, well, I don't want this one to make it or I don't want that one.
No, I want them all to
Want
make
to
it.
be, yeah, I want you all to make it because the more we're doing, I feel the more we're benefiting the beings that we all care for so much, right?
Yes.
And it's funny. I did want to point out one of the best businesses ever that someone called me. They were thinking about doing actually addressed what you were just talking about because they had a situation where uh, they had worked with exotic animals, not your dogs and cats. And there were a lot of rescues. There were a lot of folks who, to your point, were never going to get a vacation. We're never going to get any time off. And what she had concluded, because she had done this and she realized that's the biggest road to burnout. So, what can I do? So, what she started doing was she would go and be at a place for a month so that they could take a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks off and then come back and she would run their work. I thought that was phenomenal. And, she could do it. She was single, etc. And I told her, I said, this is great. Let's go do it. And she's been doing that now for 6 years
Hmm.
and just loves it. Um, so what you say is very real. And again, when someone says, "Hey, do we need?" My other question too, quite often, it's like, "I'm going to do," and I don't want to call out any specific thing, leashes, collars, but do we really need another company coming up with that? And by the way, my answer is yes, if there's a reason for it. If you just got your new embroidery machine and you're going to create different designs than anybody else is going to, okay, good luck. I'm not sure about that unique positioning, or
You
how
need
you're.
Etsy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, have you checked that? But that being said, you know absolutely there are many reasons you can start today and be successful in the pet world, in the pet business side of things. But go in, as you just said, with a full understanding and how you're going to execute and do it now. I thought the other nice thing that you just pointed out is if you're not in it right now, this is the best time for you to plan. You're not going to hit everything, but right now you have the time because once you're in it and you're in the wash. And so you've got to make sure that, you build in some time to just, okay, I'm going to reflect. I'm going to take notes. I'll tell you the biggest thing I say to existing businesses, and it sounds funny, but it's journal what's going on. Same thing you do for your pet, right? Keep track of what's going on a daily basis. Because, and I want to ask you about this. When I ask them, what are you seeing? What's going on? They'll give me these overarching things, and I'll say, give me an example. And they'll sometimes struggle, and I'll say, the next time that happens, let's write it down. What happened? You know, um, why did it happen? And then we can start to backtrack and unpack that and go, okay, are we the cause of this or is something else the cause of this? And so,
So
for you,
I'm
how
gonna
did you keep track of it?
I'm gonna
Uh,
say this as somebody with a psychology degree.
yeah.
Who's got time for that shit? I
No,
mean,
well, but if you
I
can't
mean, no, no,
explain
no.
the
And
problem,
I'm
yeah,
I'm just saying, but you know that, I mean, for me, since you asked me, I'm
yeah,
there. I was there every
right,
day, so I was living it, watching it, being part of it, analyzing it, examining it, doing so much of it. It's a different thing depending on your role as an owner. Are you there every
true,
day? Are you mostly managing it from afar? Do you have 10 locations and you're just basically on the phone with your managers and that kind of thing. So
yeah,
it's very different for everybody. But for journaling, it wouldn't work for me,
yeah. And
because
journaling it, that's just an easy term. Most
I know I
most
just
people.
couldn't resist.
I know you could. You
But
gotta crush me. It's okay.
no,
The
it's just like,
dynamic that Lauren and I have, folks, you're seeing it.
it's
I
just the
can't
time
win.
that it takes to write about it. It's like, oh my gosh, I've got to move on to, the
But
48
if you
other
but if
things I
you
have to
can't
accomplish.
explain, you could. You absolutely can. But if someone calls you and they can't tell you, what are you going to say to them?
Well, what I say is, well, so what's your role? If you're not there, if all you're giving me is sound bites of what's happening in the industry or what is typical for businesses overall, that tells me you're not there. So I need to have a better understanding of your role. First of all, I need to have an understanding of your role and what you perceive the issues are. And, when I'm doing consulting work, this is a lot of what I'll do. And then I'll say, okay, now I need to talk to your manager. Since you're not the one there, I need to talk to your manager and your staff and get their perceptions of it. It's bothersome when nobody in the store can tell you anything with any specificity at all. In part of what I did when I was training my staff is people tend to speak in generalized, cut to the chase type things. And it's like, okay, that's great. I'm going to back you up now. And let's go through this step by step. Tell me exactly what happened again. And they start to reiterate it, and I'll start interjecting, with particular things. Was the animal throwing up? How long was the animal throwing up? Was it this food only? Was there anything else given? Did you ask? Were there, and start getting into those kinds of things. Because it's also a training moment, and it also set us apart to be able to really ask the questions to get to the bottom of, okay, so it might not have been the food you were feeding. It might have been the fact that your kid was a counter surfer, and took a roast off of your counter and ate that. And that's why your kid was throwing up. You see what I'm saying? It's a lot of, and I use that just as a general example. When it's from the business standpoint of, we're not making any money. Okay. How long you been in business? Historically, is this a time of year that this typically happens? What's different? Do you have different employees? Is it, we need to look at overall what's going on in the world, like election years versus non-election years. All of that has an effect. What's happening in the economy versus, right now it's the tariffs. There's a general panic among manufacturers who are making things out of the country, like utilizing Canada and things like that. Not getting anything into anything political because there's no politics for animals. Love that. Um, but there are considerations that affect profit and loss. And so you have to take a look at that. And it's really astounding to me that people don't they can't give me historical information. If this is typically the time of year. So some of the time, for example, someplace that I worked the last couple of years, I said traditionally in the summertime, the industry is slower. And here's the myriad of reasons why. If you're not experiencing that, awesome. I talked to a retailer 2 weeks ago who said, "Oh my gosh, it was like Christmas all over again, and it's February." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what do you attribute that to? Let's talk about that." Because you could hear the excitement, and what is the one thing every retailer wants to do is any owner wants to do is repeat, repeat, repeat. What happened here so that we can generate that again? Is it something we can control and make happen? So let's break it down. But it's really, and that's where you mentioned the journaling, it's really interesting the lack of analyzation that goes on beyond looking at, when you and I look at the analysis of the podcast, for example, and follow that. We just spoke about this before we got on this call. What we're hearing and what we're seeing, the two don't line up. So if that's the case, you really have to be able to analyze beyond anything that you're seeing in forms of numbers to what's it feel like, what's going on, what's the worldview, all of that to be able to understand it and potentially generate that again.
Right. Right. No, well, one thing that we can generate again is another
It's another
episode.
podcast.
Yeah, practical pet business. There are so many things that I'm chomping at that we've just hit on here. But again, folks, we really appreciate your time. We're trying to keep these a little bit shorter, and I know you're saying fail, Rob, but we are,
Lorin.
yeah, we are working on keeping it tight. So I'm going to say, Lorin, this is just phenomenal stuff, and just we scratch the surface. We're going to do a lot more of these. Again, folks, if you've got something or share your stories, how are you addressing these types of issues? Share that with us. We would love to share it with the pet business community out there. You can send us an email, practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Again, we're not going to answer a specific question, but we are certainly going to share and answer to the groups. Really appreciate you joining us. Lorin, as always, any time spent with you is amazing. So thank you.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate you.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.